I know I was born for this. Don't care for the critics, my words are like physics, a force that they can't stop. They just don't get it, I think they forget I'm not done till I'm on top. I know I was born for this. I know I was born for this. I believe we can write our story.
All right, Hop a Day. Hello, how you doing? Hello, everybody. It's Gary here, Gary Wise. Words from the Wise. As usual, this podcast is still sponsored by Wise Leadership Solutions, coming out of Ocala, Florida. Happy to be out of Ocala. Love this town. Also, the Vanguard High School Navy Junior ROTC, the Knights Battalion, doing big things. If you're interested in your kids getting some leadership development and citizenship development, send them over to Vanguard. We'll take good care of them. Looking forward to having a great conversation today with my guy, Chris Cahill. So I'll bring him in. What's up, Chris?
Hey, brother. How you doing, man? Hope you're having a good week.
Man, I'm having a great week. It was hot today. I'm not going to lie. The mornings have been starting off cooler, though. Have you noticed that?
Dude, I'm in work before I even know. The day it comes and goes and disappears.
Yeah, so I've been getting up to PT around 5 o'clock in the morning every day. And I will tell you, this week has been a lot nicer in the morning in the garage, right? It's just not nearly as hot as it was. And so optimistic that it's starting to cool off, right? And we can move on to the, I don't want to say, I love the summers. I love pool weather, but I also enjoy the change of pace, right?
I do. More importantly, it's football season. So
for real. Like, you know what's funny is I enjoy the game way more than I have like a favorite team. You know,
Okay.
like I'm a Bucks fan because
Okay.
you know why not? I'm in the area, and I was a Navy recruiter when Tampa Bay won the Super Bowl in 2002.
Okay. Yeah.
And growing up in Utah, we didn't have NFL teams. You know, of course, we all like the Broncos because it's the closest like city with a team that might be applicable to us. And so I kind of absorbed into the Buccaneers world. So I like the Bucks, but I just enjoy a good game, right?
Yeah. No, I'm probably the opposite. I enjoy yelling at the games for the bad games, but no, I'm a Gator all the way through and through, which then means the SEC, and then there's a hierarchy to the SEC, and then we have our competitors. So pretty much every team, it's like a soap opera. There's a reason why I like or don't like everything. So I'm a college guy though. Pro is fun, but college is to me that's where it's at.
No, and so for college football, I'm a BYU fan because I grew up in Utah, right? And my family in Utah, you're either BYU or Utah. It's just how it is. It's like Florida, whether you're FSU or Gators, right? It's one of those two things.
Right.
So I'm a BYU fan, but I'm not nearly as passionate as as people can be. Now, I do believe college fans are a lot more committed to their teams than professional fans.
Well, you could get a Bucks ticket for like $49. I was trying to get the cheapest ticket to any Gator game to sit in the nosebleeds, and it was like starting at $300 and $400 for a no name team. And I'm like, what? I'm sitting at the far top at a no name team, and I can go to the Bucks and sit sideline for $50. Come on now, college is better, at least in the SEC.
Yeah. Well, and that's a fact, right? The conference matters, and the marketing of the conference matters, and the actual competitiveness. The SEC is just without a doubt in a league of its own, right? Like
absolutely. And all the haters, you need to go find a new podcast because you're wrong. SEC, there is no competition, which is why next year they're splitting it up and making us have to play ACC and Big Ten or whatever and so forth to try to even that out a little bit.
Just because I don't know. How did the SEC become such a competitive powerhouse? Is it just better recruiting? Is it the area that they're in the country? Is it just like, what is it about those schools that have gotten to be such an elite level of college football?
I really don't know, but it's just been going on so long. It's kind of like when Dallas or whatever had their dynasty or the 49ers, it's hard to break somebody down once they have it because then they're getting the recruits. And so it's like a tidal wave. It just keeps feeding. A good school gets more recruits means better talent means better school. And the cycle just keeps going. And it's been like that for as long as I've been alive. I don't know.
Yeah, man. I don't know either. I mean, I think it has to be, again, like once you build a legacy business or organization is going to continue to attract talent, right?
Yeah.
And for whatever their reasons. And I bet you a lot of those players grew up wanting to play football at one of those institutions.
Sure. And we have a lot of feeder schools, like even right here, Catholic, Trinity Catholic and stuff like that. These schools are direct feeder schools. I mean, they're prepping these kids to play at the next level, from Pee Wee on. Like that's what they're doing. I mean, school is great, but we're here to play football.
It's funny. So my 11-year-old is now playing for the Marion County Youth Football, and it's actually he's wearing pads for the first time. He's always played like flag, and he's never played tackle.
Okay.
And it's a new experience, man, being a dad at that level and seeing the level of commitment that people already have at the age of 11, bro. Like there was people already like socializing names of agents and like marketing companies to start recording my kid. I'm like, bro, if my kid somehow is a football phenom, okay, but I don't know that I want to worry that much about it at 11 years old.
So I'm going to tell you, here's a life hack that I tried, but my son wanted nothing to do with it. But if you want to make sure your kid's a millionaire, having fun, having a pretty fun life, it's easy, man. Start him out at age 5, put a field goal in your backyard with a net behind it, and teach him to kick field goals from age 5 on. Because he won't have a lot of competition, because by the time they get to high school, nobody can kick a dang field goal. So they try to recruit soccer players to come over and join the football team and stuff like that. But if this kid's been practicing since he was 5 years old, he's going to college and he's going to go on and play pro. And it's like, dude, you're going to go make millions to kick a field goal every 2 or 3 times a game. Come on, brother. Go practice kicking field goals and have an easy life.
Yeah. No, you're right. You're 100% right about the soccer players, man. They are all over the soccer players for field goal kickers. Yeah. And how many times has a field goal kicker changed the game?
Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like, special teams, without a doubt, are an important part of the whole configuration of the team.
A huge part.
And if you can get a kicker that can put the ball where it needs to go every time on time, that's a good skill to have in the game of football.
I mean, anytime you're in the red zone, there's a pretty good chance you're probably going for 3. And if you can hit 3s consistently, they add up.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Nope, that's a fact. All right, dude, here we go. We're going to get into tonight's conversation. I have been thinking about this for the last few days. We talk leadership a lot on this podcast, and it's what I love to talk about. I love figuring out how to help people, how to help them figure out life, and how to best explain things to people. And I think one of the best, of course, the best person that's ever walked the earth to give us explanations of how to better lead is Jesus, right? I think Jesus left such good stories and such good principles that we still unpack them. And as I've looked into this, the amount of content that's already out there in the world around these principles are interesting. And so I wanted to kind of talk with you about them today, not only to hear your perspectives on it, but then, of course, to share my own. So I'm going to share four parables or stories that Jesus left us with, and then I want to unpack them really not so much from the theological context, but more from the leadership perspective as what can you gain from them, because each of these 4 stories are 100% applicable to people in responsibility positions today. Like, you will deal with this kind of stuff. And, there's the whole what would Jesus do thing. But even when Jesus tells the stories, I don't know that it's always about what would Jesus do. It's more about him provoking thoughts in you to inspire you to do it for the right reasons. And so you're better prepared or better understanding as to why the perspective is. Does that make sense?
Well, it makes perfect sense. And I think, in fact, I'd like to hit on that later. I think sometimes when you look at these parables, we can take them too, I won't say literally, but I'll say maybe too wooden. And we don't realize that it's really more about discernment. And it's really about learning how that applies in your life. And as I think we'll get into, if we go where I think you might, there's a few points I want to make out where I think people maybe sometimes miss the point because they're so busy on trying to read it word for word. And I have nothing against saying the Bible obviously is literal, but what are you really learning from it instead of trying to fight? Is it and or? Let's figure out what the bigger picture is.
Oh no, I got a feeling we're gonna go in, bro, because I just have a feeling. All right, so the first one is the parable of the Good Samaritan, right? And I think for context, everyone needs to understand, or everyone listening to the sound of our voices. And Chris, if I mess this up, help me figure it out or write it. But in the context of this time and conversation, you had Jewish people and you had everybody else, number one, right? They all felt like, okay, we're Jewish, so we're this special elite group. And then everybody else is maybe not even less than, but different for sure, and not part of our group. And then the Sumerians or the Samaritans is one of their arch nemesis, if you will. Those like the next door neighbors they don't really like.
Yeah.
And
That's fair.
and so this is a story about a good Samaritan, which I think is interesting because Jesus is telling them this story to his Jewish followers about an esteemed Samaritan. And they're like, what do you mean? One of them, they're not one of us. How are they esteemed, right? Is that in the right context?
I think that's fair, yeah.
All right, here we go. And this is the book that I got. So if it's different than your book, I'm sorry, people. This is just one I got for my birthday. So this is what I'm using.
Being only, brother.
Right. And this is in the book of Luke. It's chapter 10, starting at verse 25. And he says, then an expert in the law stood up to test him, saying, so here's this guy who's in this place that Jesus is probably preaching, and he's going to challenge him right in front of everybody and ask him some hard question. And he's going to say, teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And the answer comes back and says, well, what is written in the law? He asks him, how do you read it? He answers, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul, with all your strength and with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. He says, you've answered correctly. Do this and you will live. But wanting to justify himself, because he wants to be a jerk and he wants to justify why he's trying to be pompous or whatever it is that's my ad lib. He asked Jesus, and who is my neighbor? Jesus took up the question and said, here comes the story, folks. This is where he's going to school this guy. He says, a man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho, and he fell into the hands of robbers. So they strip him, they beat him, and they fled. They run after leaving him half dead. A priest happens to be going down that road, and when he sees him, he passed by on the other side. In the same way, a Levite, when he arrived at the place and he saw him, he passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan on his journey came up to him when he saw the man, and he had compassion. He went over to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put him on his own animal and brought him to an inn to take care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii, which is some money, and gave them to the innkeeper and said, take care of him. When I come back, I'll reimburse you for whatever extra you have to spend. Which of these 3 do you think proved to be a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? The one who showed mercy to him, he said. Then Jesus tells him, go and do the same, bro. Like, go and do the same. Right? Like, and so let's back that up, right? The guys, first of all, why is this guy, do you think, challenging Jesus in this place of teaching? Why are they challenging him as he's probably preaching to a group of people already?
Well, everything that Jesus does is counterculture, we could say. And if you look at the parable itself, who walked by? A priest and a Levite. So essentially the religious leaders. That'd be like saying, hey, the CEO and the pastor of your local big church just ignored the homeless man and walked on by. That'd be like saying that today, something along those lines. And of course, they don't like that because anything Jesus teaches shows their hypocrisy. And it's like, look, man, you're so busy like you were talking about before, you're so caught up in the rules, the rituals, the traditions, the who's clean and who's not clean, that you're missing the bigger narrative. And, Jesus came to eat with the sinners. He didn't come to hang out with the righteous. None are righteous, not one. And so when you look at anything Jesus teaches, the quote unquote, the elite, the upper crust, the spiritually, godly men, they don't like it because he's literally saying, you can talk all the words, like it says, you're like a whitewashed tomb, and inside you're dead bones. You're nothing. stop all the junk, as we'll learn far more and more as we go through this. And as anybody who knows the Bible, none of that matters.
Yeah.
Put Jesus in your heart, which means love him, live your life for him, which is done by loving others and being that reflection. And none of us are perfect. We know that. But to your question, he's literally saying, stop. Can we just start loving each other? All we need is love. That's really the lesson. And we overcomplicate it.
Dude, 100%. I can just see, as a teacher, as a person who teaches, right? Like literally, right? I have had so many people in my life try to ask me a gotcha question or try to get me off track of what I'm doing as part of my lesson plan. Gotcha. I prepared for the day. I have things I want to do. I've got stuff going on, and I don't need you trying to distract me, bro, with some audacious question that we know is not really along the lines of what I'm talking about. This guy goes in, is like, how do I get eternal life? Like, all right, riddle me this, Ghost Rider.
Right.
Like,
I got you now.
Yeah, right. I know. But Jesus is like, okay, dude, what's it say in the book, in the law? Like, what does your law say? And the guy answered, he says, how do you read it? Right? How do you read it? Because that matters to me, right? How do you interpret this? You're asking me this question. Okay, if I trust people, if I trust somebody, I'll probably give him my first initial answer. But Jesus is probably operating in the space that he has to understand it's a minefield everywhere he goes.
Everywhere.
And so if this guy's going to start off like this, how do you read it? Is like, what is your how do you translate the book, the word, right? The law. What is your narrative going to be? But then the guy nails it, right? The guy says, the book says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, with all your mind, and your neighbor as yourself. And Jesus says, good job, bro. Do that.
Now do it.
And you got it, though. And you got it, right?
So wait a minute. So let me ask you this, though, Gary.
Yeah.
So you basically just summed up the whole good news, right? That's it.
Yeah.
So then let me ask you this. So then why is it that in almost every Bible study you go to, it somehow gets back into at least some people within the Bible study in a lot of churches will then get right back into. So therefore, you must keep the 10 commandments. You must do this. You must do this. You must do this. And it's like, look, I'm not saying you mustn't. I'm not. And it says if anybody tells you not to, right? Okay, there's a warning right there. But the point was, would you quit trying to count and say, can you do these 10 things right? Because you can't. You're going to mess up. But if you go out with love, those 10 things will happen automatically. You're not going to lie. You're not going to cheat. You don't have to worry about that I do all 10 things right. But if you walk out in everything in love, then the intention, the spirit is there. And even when you fall short, at least you fell short with love. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Oh, and I'll tell you that when I became a Command Master Chief, right? So when I was a damage controlman, I was doing everything in my power to get the job done, but there was times that I unfortunately was not always able to do everything by the book, right? For example, once upon a time, I was on an aircraft carrier, and there was an installed firefighting system that they no longer made repair parts for my ship. Just no longer did they make them, right? And me as a young senior chief, I wanted so badly to be successful that I literally trained my guys wrong. And when I say that, it was I took all the parts that I had, and I had like 8 of these systems, right? Well, I made like 4 of them perfect. And then when I brought the inspectors through, I showed them the first one, and he said, good job, let's go to number 2. And while they were going to number 2, my guys were breaking the parts off number 1 and putting it on number 5. Right. And I did that all the way through and all 8 were up, thumbs up. Right. And that was a young senior chief. I'm a young guy. I'm just trying to do good. I'm trying to be successful. I went through a lot of years after that of learning hard lessons. And I learned that the answer was really tag out those things. They cannot be used because there's no repair parts available, and take the hit.
Right.
Don't cover it up.
Right.
Don't teach your people to cheat and to
You miss
maneuver
the whole
around.
intention. It's like, yeah, we passed and none of it's working. So what did we really get?
Exactly. Show faith in the system, show faith in the organization, and show them the reality, which is where I think a lot of organizations don't always know what's going on behind the scenes because their people are just trying to do the best they can do. Now, mind you, I rang the bell a bunch of times, right? I rang the bell a bunch of times, but I finally felt like I was to the point that I didn't know what else to do. Now, of course, I learned lessons through life. And when I became a master chief and a command master chief, I would protect my people from doing stuff like that. I would find out they were doing that, and I would say, no, that's not what you're going to do.
Yeah.
You need to go ahead and do it by the book. You need to tag it out, shut it down, and make us feel the pain till we can help you fix it the right way. Otherwise, we don't get to have French fries because you can't use the deep fat fryer because the installed fire suppression system doesn't work the right way.
Yeah.
Right. And that's a hard line to walk. And when I went into that program, I was like, I'm not walking past a piece of trash without picking it up. I am going to live every day to the best of my ability to always be forthright and stand up because I have to do my best to, if I ever make a mistake, it's a mistake. It's an actual mistake. And it's not because I was being devious or I was trying to work the system. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
Like,
absolutely.
I was moving into a position of leadership that a lot of moral authority and moral responsibility was there. And I still feel the same way now as a teacher, right? Like, I have got to do my best to be authentic, but also to try to follow every rule, all the rules as much as possible. So that way, if I ever slip, trip, and fall, it's a mistake. And I can accept that because I made a mistake. Now, on the reverse, I don't wake up every day worried about every rule in the rule book.
Yeah.
Right? I don't wake up every day worried about all the rules in the legal code.
Yeah.
I don't wake up every day worried about all the things a person could do wrong in life. I wake up with love in my heart. I'm going to do my best. And if I make a mistake, it's going to be an authentic mistake. And whatever consequence comes my way, I'll take it.
Yeah.
Because
I, as you know, I run life at 110%. That's just what I do. And I said this to some of our corporate leaders and stuff like that kind of like, from higher ups every now and then I'll meet with once or twice a year type of deal and talk about the practice and what we're doing. And I always tell them, I'm like, look, I'm not a brown noser. I'm never going to play corporate politics. You're never going to get me sending an awesome email telling you how great everything is. I said, you probably won't ever hear from me. And when you do, it's going to be probably me griping because I'm going to gripe up, but I'm going to be good down, if that makes sense. And so I feel like if you're peer or less, then you should hear good. If you're above me, you're going to get the gripes because as a leader, servant leader, which we'll talk more about later, then your job should be to remove obstacles for my success. I will never be a brown noser, but you can always count on me to do what's right for the client and to do what's right for the practice in the firm. I will never put anything in jeopardy of that. But when you send out a stupid rule that says, oh, we want everybody to send back an email about whether or not you and your wife are coming to the party by Friday at 5, bro, that's on the least of my priorities. I may or may not even show up, let alone tell you if I'm showing up or not. But on the same note, if a client comes in and they have an emergency or whatever, I don't care what it is, I'll stop what I'm doing to fix them. So yeah, to me, the politics and I'll miss the point. But if you wake up every day doing the right thing for other people, that covers a multitude of sins, I should say.
Yeah, and I think even as we're getting to the Last Samaritan, I think that or this Good Samaritan, I think unpacking the conversation that happened before the parable is huge.
Yeah.
Right? Because again,
context.
The why you do something is almost always more important than how or what or consequences or results. Why are you doing it? And if you're doing it for the right reasons, you're probably going to be okay. And if it doesn't always get across the finish line, that's probably going to also be okay as well. Now, we're going to talk some more about areas where you have to learn and just, like you said earlier, discernment, right? You gotta learn. You gotta gain wisdom. You've got to pay attention and try, right? But step one is just going into it with an authentic heart, with love in your heart. Now, this next part, right? He highlights and he says, Well, and who is my neighbor? Because it says, love your neighbor as himself. And
Right.
so Jesus says, all right, now let's qualify that statement, boss. Who is your neighbor? Because unfortunately, some people are not always the most neighborly, right? You got people that maybe have a stereotype or they have an opinion or they will, I will tell people, you are not currently high on my list of people I really want to mess with right now because you're unfortunately not consistently showing me the results that we need to be together to do these things. Doesn't mean I don't care about you on a human level. I had a guy come by and see me the other day. I say he's a guy, he's a student, used to be in my program, no longer is, right? And I have a rule that you don't come in my classroom if you're not one of my students. It's my rule, right? My classroom is a sanctuary for my students. That's who comes in my classroom. And so if you're not one of my students, you're supposed to wait at the door and I'll come meet you at the door if you're coming to talk to me, right? My classroom is a sanctuary for my students. That's just part of the deal. Well, this guy, now he's got like a full beard, looks like a grown man, right? He's in high school, he's a junior now, but he used to be in the program. He used to be one of my students. So he just comes right in my classroom and I'm working at my desk and it's lunch at the time. So I've got my doors are available because everyone's outside. I'm on a portable. I'm outside with everybody, right? It's lunchtime. Kids are flipping rifles, kids are eating lunch. It's a good time. He comes in and he comes says taps me on the shoulder. I turn around and I was like, "What in the heck are you doing in here?" Right? Like, you got a big old face full of hair. Like, what are you doing? He was like, "Well, I just came by to say hi." And I was like, "But you know the rules. You can't just come to my portable just to say hi. You want to say hi? Join the program again, bud. Come say hi all you want. You got to shave your face, get a haircut, right?" And he was like, "Okay." And he goes to leave. So I'm like, "Oh man!" So I catch him. I catch him outside, right? I was like, all right, bro, what's up, man? Are you okay? Like, are you good? Do you want to talk about something? He's like, no, I was just wondering about could I come back into the program maybe next year? And I was like, yes, definitely. We got to shave your face, got to get a haircut. But why didn't you come? And we had a conversation, right? Long story short. Um, but I remember that split second moment because I was hard on him at first, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're
Mm-hmm.
not supposed to be in here. You know the rules. Psh, ejected, get out, right? But no sooner did he get halfway out my door, I was like, I got to catch this kid, man.
Right.
Because what if there's something going on that he wanted to tell me that for whatever reason I was the guy he wanted to come talk to, and so I was able to catch him, pull him into some shade, have a conversation, give him a hug, tell him I care. But I got rules for a reason, right? Part of a privilege of being in the program is you get to come to the fun classroom, right? If you're not in the program anymore, that's a consequence,
Mm-hmm.
And I just think about that because that's one of the dangers to being how I am, where I'm a clear communicator with people, especially when they're not always in the right place with me. And then unfortunately, one of the downsides of that is it may cause people to not call me. On the reverse, brother, I get a lot of calls every day. Like at some point, there's got to be some healthy boundaries.
I was going to say we've talked about that. I got so many calls that I finally just set very hard boundaries, and now a lot of people think that I'm a hard nose, and I'm like it's very clear. I have very high standards for this for the people that I keep around me at work. And if you let me down once, I give you a second shot. You let me down twice, you are literally dead to me. I remove you from my phone, and you are gone. And that's because I went too long. Without the boundaries. And I think it's pride more than anything. I think it's your ego saying, oh, these people can't get by without me, as if I was dead. Somehow they wouldn't find somebody else to call to get help. But I felt like, man, look, 13 people texted me today saying they need help. And I think I wore it as a badge of honor until it wore me out and I had no gas left in the gas tank to give to myself and my family. And it was like, you know what? Now, there's a hard boundary. And if you're not in that little inner circle, you're gone.
Brother. So I'm in my classroom working during lunch and I hear, Master Chief, what time does this lunch end? I literally turned around, looked at this young man who was taller than me. I pointed at the bulkhead, which has the posted signage of all the times. And I said, that's all I did. I just pointed at the sign. I looked at him. Oh, I'll go look at the sign. Like, bro, like I appreciate your immediate thought was to ask me but
Right.
you need to learn how to think for yourself and be an adult and
Yeah.
or be a responsible human being and go look at the signage. And better yet, we're at lunch right now. You're probably on your cell phone. Use that cell
Right.
phone to set an alarm that goes off when your lunch is almost over or something, right?
Help
All right. Hey, back to
helpers
the
can
Good
become
Samaritan, though,
enablers
right?
very quickly.
Huh?
I said helpers can become enablers very quickly with good intention. And then you're like
Yes.
that. Now you've enabled him because he's like, I'll just ask. And it's like, how
Yeah.
about learn to do some things?
That's it, man. That's it. Okay, back to this Good
All right.
Samaritan thing. So he schools the guy on your neighbor, maybe not who you think your neighbor is going to be, but are you still going to love them? Right.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses the example of, like you said, a Levite or a political leader, right? A priest that they don't only pass him by, they cross to the
They
other
go to the
side
other
of the
side of the
road.
street.
Yeah, they cross to the other side of the road. And and I get that analogy. I mean, I was running the other morning. It was dark. There was a car that was broke, like on the side of the road with the headlights. I'm not gonna lie. I crossed the other side of the road because I was like, "You're not gonna take me today, dude. Like, I'm not gonna run by this truck and get jacked up. I don't know what's going on.
Right.
There's nobody out waving their hands asking for help. But I'm all about helping somebody, but I'm cautious in 2025, right? Unfortunately, not everyone's to be trusted all the time, and that's something that people do got to think about. But I think in this story, he's telling about a person who's visibly jacked up, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's broke, he's down on his luck, he's gotten his clothes ripped off of him. And the first one is a leader who's supposed to be willing to help people, right? Like that's what you said. That was your pitch. That was your stump. That's what you got voted for on was you're
Right.
going to help,
Right.
right? And you're going to cross the road. And then the other one's a preacher who unfortunately crossed the road. But then here comes the Samaritan who's going to help. Now, imagine you're the Samaritan's friend, right? Who he gets done helping the guy, pays the denarii, and says, I'll pay you the rest of the money on my way back out of town when I'm leaving. And then you go on and you tell someone the story about what you just did. Do you
Right.
think his friends might have been like, what? Why did you do that?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Do you think they might have second guessed that?
I think most people would. I think that's why the story's in there. Unfortunately, even at a church, I went and visited a church, and when I went there, the front parking spot was reserved for pastor, and at fellowship they did the opposite. The pastor was elevated and got to grab the first thing before everybody else went through. And the Marine Corps taught me a long time ago: servants eat last, leaders eat last. And when I ever see a leader that doesn't wait till everything's done, because maybe the food will be gone and you don't get any, and that's the way it should be. You're the leader. And we talked about this, I think, before. But whenever I see that, imagine seeing reserved for pastor and then pastor eat first. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to pray for this church because they don't have the right leader on their flock here. But anyway, who am I to question that? Whatever.
No, you're not wrong, right? And I get rank has its privilege, and I get people pay respect to certain organizations and or positions, but it's the whole paper cup analogy, right? It's not about a person in particular, it's about the position that gets the respect, right? And the leader filling the position is the one that best knows how to have the class of doing it the best way possible, right? Which is my favorite way is being a part of the group, being among the group, right? Not being the person that's outside of the group. But I also understand that at times as the leader, it can make people uncomfortable when you're among the group, right? Because it can be awkward. It can be a little bit strange. It's always a compliment when you're a leader and you can be among the team and everyone treats you regular.
And they speak freely.
Yeah, that's a compliment, man.
Right.
That's a compliment. And it's hard. It's hard to have that, and especially in big organizations, because the higher you go, the more of a perception of disconnect there can become, right? Especially when there's layers of management in between you and them, right? Because everyone's worried about their reputation or their opportunities. And it's tough, man. You got to get down there and don't be afraid to help.
Yeah. Well,
You know?
Saving Private Ryan, I think, was a great example of leadership. When you see Tom Hanks's role, he was amongst the men, even though he was the officer in charge. But they felt comfortable to speak freely. They would gripe to him when they needed to, but they'd also then turn around and have the respect when they needed to, and vice versa. He'd give them enough freedom to feel that they could be themselves, but when things needed to get done, they would get done. And he would do it ethically, even if it was the hard decision. I think that was a great example. That whole movie is a great example of good leadership.
It really is, and you know, there's a lot of good examples in those kinds of movies because unfortunately, military people or people that have served, they get put in a lot of those positions where it's just human nature, right? And you've got to, and then of course, when you're in a space where you pot like firefighter, I would say, look, I'd say almost anything in 2025. We just saw, unfortunately, another school shooting yesterday, right? So even unfortunately, people that are living in a school in a building, they might have to go through something where they have to really depend on each other, right? And so when you get put in those positions, you learn how to really care for each other. And when you grow up through those ranks, you really learn how to lead
Yeah.
because you remember being that young guy. And then you get the chance to kind of move. That's where I think the armed forces have it. And I would say even schools, right? Because every principal was once a teacher, right? They kind of work their way up the ranks, and hopefully they never forget where they come from, right? That's another thing. You know, if you're a leader of a, you can use a church, you could use anything. If you don't have to work your way up through it and get some chops, you might have some struggles when it comes to leading and communicating because you may not be able to relate with what they're going through.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that's a challenge. All right, let's move into the next one. So the Good Samaritan. I think that was a really good perspective on things. I forgot that he said basically, hey, I'll come back and pay you even more money if there's even more cost, right? Like that guy was such a solid guy. Like he really did a great job. All right, here we go. Next one. Oh, we're gonna talk about the talents, the parable of the talents, and this is one of I remember learning this when I was a little kid, and from my parents teaching this to me, and I don't think they understood even what they were teaching to me at the time, but boy, as an adult, this one has a lot of goodness in it. Here we go. The parable of the talents, folks. This is in Matthew chapter 25, verse 14, for anyone who's interested. For he says, it is just like a man about to go on a journey who calls his own servants and entrusts his possessions to them. Okay. So a dad's about to go on a trip and he calls his boys in or his kids in. And and I always try to look at these from that kind of ownership. I'll just be honest with you. I would look at it probably a little bit different if I was a CEO or a businessman. But in this particular instance, it's a man about to go on a journey, calls his own servants. For context, it's not uncommon for people at this time to have servants that live in their homes and take care of everything while they're gone, right? But again, I really do look at this through the lens of if I had 3 sons and I'm about to go on a trip, this is what I would give to them. So to the oldest or to one, right? He says, I'm gonna give you 5. I'm gonna give you 5 talents. Which is essentially pieces of opportunity, in my opinion. I'm gonna give you 5 pieces of opportunity. Now, a talent was money in those days, but again, in my translation, I'm gonna give you are good at what you're doing, man. So I'm gonna give you 5 pieces of opportunity. And to my next one, I'm going to say, you know what? You're my mid-range one. You're doing good. You're up and coming. I'm going to give you 2 talents or 2 pieces of opportunity. And then some of the youngest one or to the little one or to the one that doesn't always have the most going yet. Here's 1 for you, right? So 1 got 5, 1 got 2, and 1 got 1. Depending, and it says in here, depending on each of their ability, right? So the manager or the man is leveraging their abilities to say, I'm going to give you 5. I'm going to give you 2. I'm going to give you 1. And then he goes on the journey immediately, right? He goes on the journey. Immediately, the man who received 5 pieces of opportunity or 5 talents goes and puts them to work and doubles it. He earns 5 more, right? So immediately, he doesn't mess around. He doesn't call home. He doesn't dial a friend. He just goes, puts it to work, and earns 5 more. In the same way, the man with 2 earned 2 more. So they both 5 and 2 went to work and doubled them. But the man who had received only 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid the master's money. Now, here we go. So 5 flips into 5 more, got double. 2 flips into 2 more, got 4. 1 goes and hides it. After a long time, the master of the servants comes back to settle accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 pieces of opportunity or the 5 talents comes up and says, "Sir, I got your 5 and I got 5 more." And said, "Master, you gave me 5 talents. See, I've earned 5 more." The master said, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will now put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy." Right? So essentially, not only did you double it, but you showed me you're capable of doing more, and I'm going to give you more opportunities so you can share in the joy. The man with 2 talents or 2 pieces of opportunity approaches and says, "Master, you gave me 2 talents. See, I've earned 2 more talents." Master says to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Share your master's joy." Now, here comes this turkey, the guy who buried his. Right? And I say that for very specific reasons. Uh, the man who had received 1 talent also approached and said, "Master, I know you. You are a harsh man, reaping where you haven't sown and gathering where you haven't scattered seed." So I'm going to stop right there. I was so annoyed when I read back through this again about this guy blaming the boss. Like, okay, why is it his fault that you're afraid? I mean, was it because you didn't communicate? Was it because you didn't ask a question? Was it because the master was really that mean? But he says, "You are a harsh man, reaping where you haven't sown." Like, that's shady, bro. You're basically saying I'm stealing other people's stuff, right? Reaping where I haven't sown. You're basically saying he's a harsh man. So and gathering where you haven't scattered seed. The man gave you he gave 5, 2, and 1. You already are in his house. You're already a part of the team. Evidently, you're on the team because you got something. He didn't give you nothing, right? And then it's going to be his fault that you were afraid. Hold on, let's see what he says. So, "I was afraid and went off and hid your talent in the ground. See, you have what is yours." Here's what the master says. "You evil, lazy servant. If you knew that I reap where I haven't sown and gather where I haven't scattered, then you should have deposited my money with the bankers, and I would have received my money back with at least interest when I returned." Right? Like, if, what the heck? So take the talent from him, and I'll give it to the one who has 10 talents. For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have more than enough. But for the one who does not have, even what he has will be taken away from him. And throw this good for nothing servant into the outer darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. Now, of course, it's way deeper than just about money and finance here, right? It really is. Because Jesus is really sending a message here about people's responsibility in life and in doing something with the life you've been given, right? God given us all life. Every day is a blessing. Every day is an opportunity to go out and do something good in the world. Every day is an opportunity to not just pray and be thankful for your blessings, but also to go out and hopefully generate blessings for other people, right? But it's also, in my opinion, there is some leadership here because I've seen this way too much in life where people are given opportunities and some capitalize on it, man. They really go. And then I've seen other people not. And then come up with these excuses that essentially blame other people for their lack of performance, for their lack of trying. And that's a disservice to everybody in the room, including themselves, right? Like, you only had to get one more to double your load, bro, and you would have had the same percentage of growth as that guy. But you didn't. Yeah. If you would have just did one, got one more talent, you would have got the same amount of love and appreciation and recognition. I mean, who had more responsibility? I mean, what do you think about this, Chris?
Well, I think the concept is, to me, there's 3 or 4 things on here. I think there's a straightforward reading, but I also think there's a reverse reading and a lesson of discernment that people often overlook. But the straightforward thing, this is part of the Olivet Discourse. So this is a kingdom parable. So this whole thing really is God. This is potter and the clay. So first off, who are you, clay, to question what the potter's doing, first and foremost? And I've given you plenty, Job or anybody else. I've given you plenty to work with. And now what are you doing with it? Well done, good and faithful servant. That's what I want to hear. Now, in all fairness, you cannot earn more of God's love. He already loves you infinitely. Yeah. But I could love my child infinitely, and then I could look at him some days and be disappointed, and then have other days where I'm gleaming with pride at the character of the man he's becoming. And I loved him the same on both days. But so I'm not saying you can earn God's love, but what you can do is you can put yourself in a position where you know that he's saying, now I'm proud of the character of the man that you've become, because you're walking in what I have given you instead of burying what I have given you. And I think all the time, I feel blessed at work. And there are some days where I'm like, I look around and I'm like, why is it that I work like 100-hour weeks? And I have plenty of friends that work 40 and go home and drink a beer on Friday and they're fine. And then I also say, yeah, but God, and I didn't do anything to earn it. God gave me a high IQ. He gave me hard work ethic. He gave me a lot of knowledge. And he gave me the opportunities that sent me to school to get multiple degrees and stuff. And none of those were anything that I could have been born in Africa. And he put me in a situation that gave me all these tools. And so, yeah, I might have friends that, in my opinion, are lazy and doing all these other things. But I look at them, I'm like, they also barely graduated high school. And I'm not making excuses, but I'm just saying, I look at my life and I'm like, well, geez, Chris, quit complaining that you have to work so hard. When God gave you the blessing to do something with it. So go do something with it. You have been given the gifts to impact so many more lives than the average 9-to-5 person that can't wait to have a beer on Friday. And so, yeah, so what if you work harder and you're more tired? I gave you more. Now do more with it. And so to me, I actually look at it as dang, Chris, you're complaining that you had to work so hard. That was a blessing. How about I get to work so hard because God gave me so much? That changes the perspective. And I forget it. I have days where I come home and I'm like, yeah. But the reality is, I think the bigger lesson is, man, well done, good and faithful servant. I want to hear him say that, not to make him love me more, but to make myself feel that I'm walking worthy of the blessings that he has put on my life. And if we look around as Americans, even the poorest of us are richer than people in most countries. We have water, we have food, even if it's on welfare and whatever. I don't care how you're getting it. You got food and water. There are people starving and walking miles and stuff for that. And we take all that for granted. So how about look at what you've been given and do something? And as that pertains to leadership, wow, not everybody is given the brains to think tactically like a leader. Not everybody was given the charisma to inspire other people to follow them. Wow, if you've been given that, are you using that to better the people around you to make a bigger impact in the world? Or are you using that to climb a ladder for your own accolades or income? There's a big difference in why you live and how you live your life. Now, I will say, here's the last piece of that. I do think there's a lesson in discernment here, because this almost contradicts the ladies, the 10 virgins. And he's like, hey, look, I gave you all this oil and you used it all right away trying to light up all the lights in the house. And now what if I come later and you're out of light? You should have put some away and not lost it. And you look at it and you're like, well, wait a minute. If he gives me it, am I supposed to use it to multiply it, or am I supposed to save it for a rainy day? And it's like, well, I think that's when you start trying to read too literally instead of looking at the context of what the spirit of the message is about. You can kind of get lost in the sauce, because it doesn't financially. In the financial sector, I've seen a lot of people use this as a way to say, see, you should have bought a better stock, essentially. And it's like, bro, don't dumb this parable all the way down to you shouldn't have bought a bond. You should have bought a better stock. That's not what it's about at all. But anyway, I've seen it misused in that. But I do think that we overlook the discernment part. There are times where you have to be prudent, but not about questioning God, as he's essentially doing here when he's questioning the king or the ruler. But it is about saying, well, how does this really apply to me, to the blessings that I've been given, and more importantly, to the impact I can make.
But you know what, man? Like for me, where the guy with the one talent went all the way bad, wrong, was the blame he was putting on the boss.
Well, that's what I'm saying. That's the joke thing. You can't call Clay can't ask the Potter why he did it that way.
Yeah, like if I was so bad, don't take the talent, bro.
Right.
If I'm so bad, no, sir, I appreciate that, but don't take the job if you don't want to do the work.
Or don't protest that you don't like the way things are going in America when you're getting your checks sent by the government to pay for your bills. Just saying.
That part, right? That part, right? And look, I'm not the one that wants to be out there stomping the streets, but if you want to be a part of the solution, you cannot start off with first saying, well, you guys all suck and I don't want to be a part of this. Okay, then there's nothing to talk about.
Right? We're done. You don't want to be a part.
We're done.
Good.
We're cooked, right? But when I read through this, and I'll tell you, I had the same epiphany with Judas, believe it or not. When I was watching the most recent season of The Chosen, right? And it was very well done, and about Judas, right? And how that whole thing played out. And there's that one part when Judas could have asked for forgiveness and he didn't.
Right.
And if he would have, he would have been saved.
Right.
Because even though he sinned, he was still playing his position as a part of the whole process, right? Judas had to be Judas. Somebody had to be Judas, right? But where he went sideways was he had the opportunity to admit what he had done and ask for forgiveness. And instead of doing that, he chose to be stubborn and just take his own life and be just to be stubborn, right? Just to be stubborn and think that he was too far gone. And that's not the thing. And so I look at this guy with the talent and it's like, look, man, and I'm not trying to make this super theological, but this is the idea. In life, you get opportunities. Don't waste them, and dang sure don't waste them because you're blaming other people for why you can't do something.
Right.
Like that's the wrong energy, right? And here's the other part what I like about the story. So he said, I'm going to give them to you based off of your abilities to earn. So, Chris, I'm going to give you all these things because you got all these abilities. So you got to, if you don't double that, then you're going to kind of let me down, bro. I love you, but you could have done so much more, right? So I'm happy. Even if you would have came back with 3, 2, 4, something, you tried. If that guy would have came back with the one and said, boss, I tried and it didn't work. And I tried and it didn't work. I bet you the boss would have been like, it's all right, man. At least you tried. This dude went and just buried it in the hole and pretended like it was gone for a while. Like, come on, bro. Like, don't do that. That part right there.
Well, right? That's like that old question. Well, if God is so good, why are bad things happening in the world? It's kind of the same thing. It's like, well, gee, you're scared. You're so scared of what would happen. You're actually missing the bigger picture of his character. But
yeah, and again, I don't wake up every day worried about every law in the law book. I tell my students, you know how hard it is to not go to jail? It's freaking easy. It's easy to not go to jail. Just wake up every day and don't do bad things. Like, it's not rocket science, bro.
You don't have to memorize every law.
Yeah. I mean, I'm telling you, right? Like, and I grew up in a culture where people were going to jail consistently around me. Like, I was an immature, wild teenager too. I get it, but it's not hard. I remember one time, my sister and her husband stole some jewelry from me, and I was home on leave from the military, and I'm 23 years old, getting ready to go be a Navy recruiter. And all I had was all my clothes and 2 sea bags and a bunch of jewelry I had acquired during my first couple of years in the Navy because that's what I thought was a good idea to do with my money, right? And I'm not saying I had like $1 million worth of jewelry, but I had like some nice watches and some stuff I got from like the Gold Souk in Bahrain and stuff like that, right? And my sister and her husband came to my parents' house and stole all my stuff, right? Took it all. And I remember getting back to mom and dad's house and making a few phone calls to my buddies and getting a hold of my sister and her husband and basically saying, check this out. Either y'all bring my stuff back like before the certain time, or I know where his parents live, and their house will be full of holes. Like, because me and my boys they're not, my boys were not a gang. They wasn't a joke. Like my friends they've been my friends a long time, and they were more than happy to do bad things. And I remember asking my dad was like, no, Gary, what are you doing? Like, you're about to go be a Navy recruiter. You're still in the service. And I asked my dad, I was like, what does a regular person do? He says, they call the cops. I said, they call the cops.
Right.
I was like, I'm ready to go over there and start lighting stuff up, man. Like,
Right.
what are we talking about? And my dad was just like, Gary, now, again, if that was my son, I probably would have tied him up with a rope and said, you ain't going to go do nothing stupid, son. Right. But again, my parents they'd known me my entire life, moved out. I moved out when I was 15. They knew I was wild. Right. And I was angry. They didn't want to like have I'm on leave. They don't ever see me. Right. Their daughter just robbed me. So I'm sure they're conflicted.
Yeah. Yeah.
What the heck are we going to do here? Right. And I remember my dad. So my friends came through, and I was like, hey, y'all, I'm going to call the cops. And they were like, for real?
Right. Like what? That's not how we roll.
Is that what we're doing? And I was like, yeah, man, I'm gonna give this a try, bro. Like, I need to not make it worse, right? Like, I'm gonna call the cops. And that was a huge turning point in my life.
Yeah.
Because up till that point, and I'm still a freaking outlaw. Don't get me wrong. Give me the right reason at the right time. I'll go off the reservation real quick. Right. But that night, I learned what it was like to be a mature adult, right? And like, you give the law of the land the opportunity to do the right thing before you take justice in your own hands, right? And you have faith and you trust that it's going to all work out, and you put on a higher power than yourself, and you don't always got to be the one that goes out and does things. And so, but I just remember thinking that at this time, it was such a disrespectful thing for someone to steal something. Game changer, right? And as I look at this story and I'm thinking about these talents, it's like, okay, you get this one talent. Believe it or not, the pressure's on the guy with 5. Right? Like, I tell my students, would you rather be the kid whose family's wealthy, and if you don't succeed, you're going to lose it all? Or would you be the kid who'd rather come from a middle class upbringing and you get to be the first one to go to college in your family? Right. Even if it's the College of Central Florida, that's a college degree. Like, that's a huge win, bro. Like, people are going to scream your name from the rooftops because you're the one changing the game. Like, understand that when Spider-Man says, when those get with great power comes great responsibility. Right. And so I think with that this lesson is reminding us that you've been given these things, don't waste them, and then don't for dang sure go blaming somebody else or some other higher power because you failed to even try. Right. And that's where the frustration and that's where the disappointment. And I don't think it would have been so bad if the guy hadn't blamed the man, the leader. Right.
Yeah.
And if I'm a leader and a person's blaming me because they're not trying, that's going to probably be a reason to no longer work with that person, right? Because that's where this guy ends up going to hell and gnashing of teeth, right? Like, ultimately, if you can't see the forest through the woods, right? That's a problem, bro.
So
Right.
I just had to look it up. Luke
Yeah.
12:48. Spider-Man always gets the credit, or at least the movie, whatever, whoever it was. But from who much has been entrusted, much will be asked.
Yeah.
So it's in the Bible right there in Luke, but somehow everybody always says it. Then Spider-Man, it's like or God.
Read it. Read it. I
Well,
use Spider-Man, right? But
yeah.
what
So
is God?
the whole verse, starting back all the way through, it says, "For everyone who has been given much, much will be asked, and from the one who has been entrusted much, much more will be asked." But yeah, Spider-Man does shorten it a little bit, but it's kind of funny. It's like, well, 2,000 years earlier, God said it, but Spider-Man gets the credit.
It is the culture, right? And it resonates. But you know what I love about that is I love that you can connect that dot to the Bible,
Right.
right? Because still one of the best book
The best
ever
book,
written,
the
right?
best book, capital T.
But I do get sucked down the rabbit hole of YouTube videos about like the Ethiopian Bible and all that stuff,
I have
bro.
them. I have it. I have the Ethiopian
Do
Bible,
you?
the Coptic Bible, the Orthodox Bible, the Roman
Yeah.
Catholic Bible. I love them all. I love reading about dragons. I love reading about Baal. Maccabees is an amazing book. Enoch is one of the best, and Enoch is referenced in Second Peter, Jude, and
Yeah. It's a thing.
Hebrews, and it's like,
But
dude, if they're referencing it in the Bible, then they knew it. Now we didn't canonize it because it wasn't relevant to the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. But clearly, they respected those books, or they wouldn't have been mentioning them and even quoting from them in the New Testament. So I think when people get all like that's heresy, I'm like, bro, no, it's actually culture. And if you read it, it'll help you understand context much better with the Bible. So don't read it as inspired inerrancy. Read it as historical culture, so you understand what's going on outside the biblical narrative.
and understand that like you said, it wasn't canonized because it didn't fit the narrative for them that were just trying to focus everything on Christ.
On
Which,
Jesus.
don't get me wrong, I love that part, but there was a lot of good stuff that
A
happened before
lot.
Jesus walked this earth
A
that
lot.
God was also giving us for information, right?
Absolutely.
100%.
Which is why
All
I've
right.
read them. They're great. Anyway.
Yeah. No, I get sucked into the YouTube videos all the time, man. I'm into it. All right, here comes the next one. This next one is about the faithful servant,
Okay.
right? This is also in Matthew. This is chapter 24, verse 45. And he says, "Who then is a faithful and wise servant whom his master has put in charge of his household to give them food at the proper time?" All right. So, who then is a faithful, wise servant whom the master has put in charge of his household to give the food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant who the master finds doing his job when he comes. Truly, I tell you, he'll put him in charge of all the possessions. But if that wicked servant says in his heart, my master is delayed, so like the boss is not coming, I got time, and starts to beat his fellow servants and eats and drinks with the drunkards, that servant's master will come on a day he does not expect him, at an hour he does not know, and he will cut him to pieces and assign him a place with the hypocrites where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, right? When I read this one, it's about time management, man. And it's doing it for the right reasons and not doing it for the wrong reasons. Don't just do it because the boss is in front of you. Don't just do it because you're going to get, like you said earlier, you're going to get that seat at the special dinner on Friday night with all the bosses and all the bigwigs. So on that night, you're going to be a company man, right?
I won't even go to that party.
Brother, I've been using this saying for at least since 2004, right? And that is since I was a young second class petty officer, and that is I can always tell the true hard chargers from the butt kissers because the butt kissers get tired, right? They wear out. The true hard chargers are just being
They're
themselves.
just them.
They
Yeah.
they're consistent, man. They cannot help themselves. And so when they struggle, I get really worried and nervous because that's a bad sign, right? Because they're really all in. I remember I went to an event one time in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. So I got flown to Pearl Harbor, Hawaii to be a part of the Pacific Fleet Senior Enlisted Leader Conference, right? So I'm going to Pac Fleet and I'm sitting there with all these Master Chiefs from all of the elite levels in the Pacific Fleet, right? And I'm representing like 7th Fleet. You got 3rd Fleet there. You got Pacific Forces, Surface. I mean, all the big wigs, right? For the enlisted force. And this 4-star admiral comes in and he's giving us a brief, right? 4-star. He's the Pacific Fleet commander at the time. And he's a warrior. He's a warrior. I'll give him that. He's a war fighter. So he starts talking about the adversaries and the competition. And I'm telling you what, it resonates with me because I know it to be true. And I asked him, I said, sir, because he says, anybody got any questions? All these Master Chiefs in the room, and no one's saying nothing, right? I go, yeah, I got a question. I flew to Hawaii for this meeting. I came to play, baby. Let's go. Like, let's have this conversation. And I said, sir, everything you just said sounds great. Why doesn't your leadership, the other officers in our Navy, say what you said? Because that's the problem. We need to be more focused on the words you're saying and less worried about all the crap we're dealing with, which, oh, by the way, is finally getting calibrated, right? But I asked them the question. I'm worrying way too much about things that aren't warfighting readiness for military service members, right? And you just said all the things that are in my heart because I know they're true. Why do we not have that leadership coming down the chain of command from us? And he gets so pissed off at me. He gets so pissed off at me. He says, well, Master Chief, if you need me to come say that for you, what do I got you for? I was like, well, I'm not the 4-star admiral, bro.
Right.
Like, I'm saying the things you're saying. But the problem is that's not the energy that the rest of that leadership train is sending. So I'm looking like the guy that's out in left field freaking chasing butterflies because I think we need to be ready to go kinetic. I think we need to be focused on physical fitness and readiness. I think we need to be talking about straight conversation. And if unfortunately you're not mentally able to do the job, then maybe this is no longer the job for you. Like, because when the rounds start coming in and the ships start getting hit by missiles and stuff that we have not seen since World War II. And oh, by the way, in World War II, they couldn't shoot you unless they could damn near see you. Today's Navy, bro, we will sink you and you'll never even know we were around, right? You may not even see it coming. It's going to be minutes and all of a sudden it's going to be a problem, right? It wasn't like that in World War II. Technology has changed. We are over the horizon hunters now, right? And I'm proud of that fact, right? Like, yippee-ki-yay, let's go. You get underway on that ship, know that it can happen to you. Be prepared. Fight the ship, fight the day, die strong, right? Here we go. And I remember he leaves, and all these other Master Chiefs like, hey, Gary, are you okay? Are you okay? I'm like, yeah, y'all are some punks, man. Like, why does no one else ask? Well, Gary, just so you know, and they're, no, you know, Gary, you're so emotional. I was like, I flew from Japan for this working group. He's the 4-star. Oh, by the way, they're now fixing all this, right? But there I was ringing the bell then, and these guys are like, Gary, we just come to have meetings in between the meetings.
Right. Let's have a meeting to talk about meetings.
You guys are a bunch of tools, bro. Like, that's what I thought.
That sounds just like corporate America.
I'm telling you what, Chris, that was one of the first indicators that I thought, okay, this is not meant for me much longer. Because if this is what I have to look.
I think that's middle management everywhere. Because what happens is you got some really good people at the very top, and that's why they're at their top. They're smart, they're visionary, they're charismatic, and they truly care about the mission, and that's why a lot of them are at the top. You also have a lot of people that truly are in whatever industry or business or line of work or rank or whatever they're in because they actually love what they do and they're passionate and they're good. They're technically and tactically proficient. And so you've got these people. Well, these people think the mission the same way these people think. And then you have all the other people that did just enough to climb the ranks, but not good enough to be the leader, who are the middle management. And they're just all they are is a liability, meaning on the P&L, all they are is a line item. and they take up more space than anything else. And they have to have meetings about meetings to coordinate their meetings about their meetings, their meetings. And it's like, bro, if you all moved out of the way and just let us run, the people that want to win are winning. And we have to pause to go to your meeting about next week's meeting. This is just go away.
I couldn't believe it. So here's the other thing. So I go to this trip. My wife doesn't come because my kids are still in school, right? Like I'm a dad. I had kids later in life. I was more focused on my career when I was younger. Me and my wife chose to not have kids at a young age, and we chose to wait till later. So at this time, I've got like a third grader and like a 5-year-old, right? These other guys all brought their wives to Hawaii, and all they're trying to do is get through the meetings so they can go out and go golfing and go whatever with their wives on a vacation. And I'm just thinking to myself, we're here for a Pacific Fleet working group for war fighting readiness, and everything I got briefed. So I will tell you, after that whole thing, I didn't say much the rest of the time. I'll be honest with you, right? I just kind of thought this is whack. Y'all can send me home. You guys are a bunch of freaking tools. Like I really didn't. And these are some high level guys in the Master Chief mess, right? And I say the Master Chief mess. That's not a thing either, right? They're just freaking. They're in the mess. They're leaders, but they were all heavy high players. But everything we got briefed on, as I look back on those days, and I look where the Navy's at now, because this was 2018, 19 timeframe. The Navy still struggled with all this crap, and they're having to put a lot of it away because it was all bad. It was all bad. And I was saying it was bad, and nobody else was saying it was bad because they were all going along with the freaking the people that were going with it. And letting the lawyers run every damn thing. And the doctors. Lawyers and doctors are not war fighters. I'm sorry. They're not. Right? They're worried about litigation and diagnosing somebody with a medical condition. Thanks, doc. Do you want to go shoot? Do you want to go out and get on the ship and fight the damage? Do you want to? No? Good. Give me some advice, but quit making freaking rules. And it was so bad in the military. I mean, 100%. The doctors and the freaking lawyers in the United States Navy, horrible. Now, back to this parable, right? I tell you, because it spins me up, and I had some good Jags. I had some good Jags.
I was gonna say there's good ones, but I understand where you're coming from.
I've had some good Jags. The problem is I now know that the Jags do too good of the job, and their job is to get their bosses the answer that they want, right? And that's unfortunately the problem. And I've seen some really good prosecutors. I've seen some really good defense people. If you're guilty, you want a good defender. If you're innocent, if you're innocent, you really want. I mean, it depends on the side of the coin you're on, I guess. But I've seen some people really manipulate those laws. Now, back to this parable.
I'm picturing some doctors and lawyers, if they happen to be listening to this, which I don't know that they would, but if they were, they'd be listening to the two of us talk, and they'd be like, well, that sounds like grunts and front linemen's talking. Of course, we have a different perspective than they do, and they'd be like rolling. I can just picture some of my friends like on that side rolling their eyes. But anyway, I know what you're saying.
I would tell you, right? Again, if you're a lawyer for the right reasons, you're probably going to be okay, right? If you're a doctor for the right reasons, probably be okay. So, for example, in the service, right? They were de-screening people for ship duty left and right. Okay, so you wonder why ships don't have sailors on them? Because people who join the Navy fit for full duty, and less than a year and a half later, they're off the ship for some sort of a problem that they should probably be getting kicked out of the military. Right? But they don't. They get put in. Now they are. That wasn't happening before. Before, they were going to shore duty and just sitting around for the rest of their contract and then getting out and trying to get service-connected disability, bro.
Right.
Like that, it was a racket. And me being on the ship trying to go to sea, needing the sailors to be healthy, wealthy, and wise. And you're like, what's wrong with that dude? He was fine. They just had a bad day. That's it. Gone. Yeah. Right? And you're just like, what the heck, bro? What are we doing? And then when I come back to the Jag conversation, I will tell you, I have seen Navy Jags in particular use every inch of the law enforcement code that they have to go after people because they have a personal agenda.
Yeah,
And
well,
there's
I'm
no
sure
check and balance.
there's bad people everywhere in every line of work.
Agree. I'm not trying to cast them all, but I will tell you, for me, in the officer corps, those are some of the ones that I struggle with the most.
Yeah,
All right.
that's all right.
Yeah. Back to this parable,
All right.
right? The guy is, what do you think, Chris? It's about the faithful servant. Was
Okay.
I right when it was about the guy just doing it for the wrong reasons?
To me, it's really just about Jesus' second coming. I just see that this whole thing is Jesus' second coming, and he's saying, just like when they ask him, they're like, "Well, when? Hey, you tell us, when are you coming back?" And he's like, "It's not for me to know. It's only for the Father to know. I don't even know when I'm coming back. But listen, I'm coming back, and when I come back, it's like a thief at the night. So you better kind of have your sword and your shield on. You better have your faith in check, because you don't know when I'm coming back, and it could be tonight." And it could be 10 years. It could be 1,000 years. But the point is, you don't know. Are you ready? Because if you're not ready, you will be cast out from God, and there will be in a place separated where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And so now we are talking about truly getting to Gehenna, and you are outside of the kingdom. And so to me, this entire thing is just a warning that Jesus is coming back, and you better be ready.
And the good news is, it doesn't matter whether it's tonight, tomorrow, whatever it is, you can be saved today.
You right now.
Yeah, that's the good news, right? Like you could change your path if you're the guy that's freaking drinking with the drunkards or beating on the servants or whatever it is. What matters is you get right before the boss catches you, right? And then when the boss does catch you, you better own up to it and accept your punishment like a man, and not blame him because you couldn't get right. Because that's, again, you'll fall into the rule of the last story. That ain't gonna go good for you, bro. That ain't gonna go good for you.
Right.
At some point, you're making the bad calls, right?
Yep.
All right, last one. Let's see. Where was that one at? So we did the talents. We did the the last one is about the manager who was not a good manager. Where was that one at? Let me see. You said your buddy's a lawyer?
I've got a lot of buddies that are lawyers, but yeah.
Yeah. Chris is like, oh man, all my buddies and lawyers are gonna watch this thing.
I know. That's all right. You have the same animosity towards lawyers that I have towards like BNI and Chamber of Commerce type events. Like they gag me. So anyway, we all have our own things.
I'm actually talking to one of those tomorrow.
I used to teach at them. I used to be part of them, and it's just anyway. To me, there's so many reasons I don't like them. It's a dog and pony show. It's a charade. It's a who can be popular rather than who can be competent type of game. And it's like, yeah, but if I give you a referral, then you drop the ball on it. Now I got egg on my face, but you're going to run around and smile and tell everybody how great you are because you love networking. How about stop networking and go learn how to do your job well?
I'm looking. I like getting the opportunity to be in front of people and talk about the stuff that matters, right? So I'll almost always go anywhere when I get the opportunity to.
So I did, but as a corporate trainer, I was flown all over the place, and I would go to Vegas to speak, and I go to Miami to speak, and I go to New York to speak. So I spent so many times doing keynote speeches that now they gag me, and I'm like, hey, let's think outside the box. Let's really move the needle, guys. Let's lift it up. The teamwork makes the dream work. And I got paid to do that crap. And now when I go to events and I hear people regurgitate the same stuff, like they just learned this new crazy way about how we can work together, I'm like, it's as old as the Bible, and you just figured it out. I'm so sick of hearing it.
It's because we've been in the space, you've been in the space for as long as you have been, right?
Yeah.
Because I will tell you, for so many people in the world, it's their first time hearing it.
I remember coming home telling my wife, did you know that if we work together as a team, hey, did you know that if we network, did you know if we had a breakfast with this guy and we could add value, he'd want to, and now I hear people come up to me like, Chris, did you know if I took this guy to breakfast and had value, he would want to give me a client? I'm like, go away. Like, please just go away.
Amway works, bro. Amway works.
Listen, I love it. I still network. I'm in sales, all that kind of stuff. I get it. But eventually you get to a point where the game it's just dumb. It's like if you got gray hair and you're still doing the game, like maybe you weren't very good at the game.
Well, it could be exhausting, you know. I think that I agree. I think for me, the energy I get from it is finding those people who do get that opportunity. You see their eyes light up, right?
So I end up mentoring them. I had a guy like, for real. I had a guy that came to me, tried to knock on my door to sell me something. I loved him so much, I gave him some tips. He came back a month later with donuts. I gave him some more tips. And now he shows up every couple of weeks for ideas on how to better become a better salesman and business leader. And I actually enjoy pouring into him because it makes me feel like I'm giving back. But I'm giving back to somebody who was hungry and had the balls to come knock on my door and not just showing up at Chamber of Commerce because it's the check the box kind of thing.
So you're telling me you gave him 2 talents and he came back with 2 more talents?
Yeah, and now I gave him more, and I always do. He came into my office this morning. Yeah.
I'm telling you right now. That's so when people come to me for mentorship, and now in my new current occupation, I give it freely all the time, and I gave it freely even in the Navy too. But in the Navy, people would literally come to my office and say, "I would like you to be my mentor." Like there was like this official, like we're almost going steady, right? Like there was like this huge conversation about it, and I would tell them, I would say, "Okay, look, if we're going to enter this arrangement." Here's how this is gonna work. Because I appreciate somebody coming and having that conversation. Sure. Like I think it takes guts, right? I would say you can never tell me no.
Yeah.
Because the minute you tell me no, now we're friends, and you want to argue with me, and I just don't got the time. I don't have the bandwidth for it, right? So if I'm your mentor, I'm gonna tell you what I think and tell you what I recommend you do, and either you do it or you don't. But once you start disagreeing with me, then that arrangement no longer works. Right. And that's just how it's going to be.
That's good.
And it's just because of bandwidth space, right? I don't have the time. I'm married. I got kids. I work a full day. I got a lot of things going on. I care. I really want to pour into you, but and I will get something out of this. True. Trust me. I always get something out of the conversation, but that's just because my mentors, I never told them no until I was either at or exceeding the level they were at.
Absolutely.
And then, and typically at that point, I would start mentoring them in the reverse, right? And again, we were friends, but there was always this pouring into each other, you know?
And that's great. And to me, that's actually good fellowship. Those are relationships I like, competent peers that can support and pour into each other. I think that's great. But I think that's a very small island compared to the amount of yahoos that run around sucking energy like vampires.
There's a lot of people in the world. It's a lot of people in the world.
I don't have time for them.
It's amazing how many. I am always awakening to the new idea of how many people are really in the world, bro. Like in Ocala, in Central Florida, in America, in whatever. Like I hear these numbers and I would think I never really actually gave it thought. I never really considered how many people there are, and it's just incredible.
Yeah.
All right, here we go. The last one of the night. The parable of the unforgiving servant. Ooh, yippee-ki-yay. All right, this is in the book of Matthew. This is chapter 18, verse 23. Then Peter approached him and asked, Lord, how many times shall I forgive my brother or sister who sins against me? Has as many as 7 times? And hold on. But before I go any further, I used to always ask my dad, like, all right, Dad, if there's heaven and hell, is there like a cutoff number of sins? Like 27 and you're cooked, 28 and you're done, like 26, 25. You know, I didn't like because in my dad's religion and in the religion I was raised in, it was so black and white, right? It was so like freaking. I felt like there was hard for my critical thinking, even as a young man, was causing me to question it, right? Like, this is a very loosey-goosey rule here. Right? And
Right.
so when I hear Peter asking, hey, how many times am I going to give? Is it up to 7 that I got to
7
forgive?
times 7.
Yeah, here we go. If I tell you not as many as 7, Jesus replied, but 70 times 7. For this reason, the kingdom of heaven can be compared to a king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. When he began to settle accounts, one who owed 10,000 talents, right? So someone owed 10,000 talents was brought before him. Since he did not have the money to pay it back, the master commanded that he, his wife, his children, and everything that he had be sold. So pay the debt. So liquidation, right? Liquidate. You ain't got the money, liquidate. You got to get rid of everything to pay the debt. At this, the servant falls face down before him and says, be patient with me, and I will pay you everything. Then the master of that servant who had compassion releases him and forgives the loan. Right? I see your humility. I appreciate you asking for forgiveness and for compassion. I'm going to forgive the loan. That servant then goes out and finds one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. He grabs him and starts choking him out and says, pay what you owe, right? Pay what you owe. At this, the fellow servant fell down and began begging him, be patient with me and I will pay you back. But he wasn't willing. Instead, he went and threw him into prison until he could pay what was owed. When the other servants saw what had taken place, they were deeply distressed and went and reported to their master everything that had happened. Then, after he had summoned him, his master said to him, you wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Shouldn't you also have had mercy on your fellow servant as I had mercy on you? And because he was angry, his master handed him over to the jailers to be tortured until he could pay everything that was owed. So also my heavenly Father will do to you unless every one of you forgives his brother or sister from your heart. Whew. Yippee-ki-yay. Right? So that's a good one, man. So you got a guy working for you who owes loan. You're the bank, you're the whoever, you're the government, you're the country, you're whoever. Or even I'd say as a father, my son, my older son, owes me something and I need him to pay me back, whether it's probably work, right? You said you were going to do this in the backyard, bud. You said you're going to do it. We made a deal. I told your mom you were going to do it. You haven't done it yet. You get my butt kicked now. This is messed up. There's some consequences coming your way, right? And he says, oh, I'm so sorry. I just have, I got busy with everything, overwhelmed with things. Just please forgive me. And I said, you know what? Don't even worry about it. I already took care of it in the backyard anyway. It's already done. I was just giving you time and space to do it. I could have been done it, right? I was giving you the opportunity to do it, and we'll let it go. But then later on, I hear the arguing between my two little sons, and he's holding my younger son accountable to something that's way, way less worse, and he's being a jerk, right? That's how I hear this lesson. Because then I can see myself getting involved and be like, yo, bro, I just gave you a pass on what you were supposed to do for me. Why are you being so mean to him? Matter of fact, I'm about to give you a triple penalty, right? Because that's how is that how you're receiving this lesson as well?
I do, but I see it in a lot more of a spiritual sense
Okay.
than to me, the Bible is far more spiritual than self-helpish. And it's both. It really is both. But I tend to lean farther on the spiritual side. So again, this is one of the kingdom parables, right? So to me, Lord's Prayer, thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So God wants us to live as if heaven is already begun, not yet complete in its perfection, but already begun on earth as it is in heaven. And it's done that way when we live according to his will and not ours. And so now if I am living in the world and it's thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. You have forgiven me, and every other believer has been forgiven by grace, nothing we can earn. And so now, if God says, I love you this much, now all I want you to do is to live according to my will, then my will would say, do not carry a grudge against the person who stole all your jewelry, and say, you know what? I forgave you, and you have sinned against me, the perfect Father. And yet you want to be upset and go shoot holes in somebody's house for stealing your necklace? Like that even matters. So to me, it's, you're carrying a grudge. You're not living according to my will on earth as it is in heaven. You're living according to Gary's will in the neighborhood. And that's not going to set your soul free. And now you're going to carry that guilt, and you're going to carry that burden. You're going to carry that weight. You're going to carry that grudge, that animosity. And by the way, not just because it's the right thing to do, loving thy neighbor, but also it's against your soul, because when you're carrying guilt and anger and animosity, your soul is not free. You're not walking in freedom. You're not walking in liberation of Christ. You are literally walking in bondage. And he came to set you free, but you have to live according to his will and not our own. So when I hear this, I'm thinking, wow, think of how many times I've sinned just today. How many times I got mad at somebody. How many times the person on the phone, I slammed the phone down a little harder than I want and kind of rolled my eye. All these little things that were my soul being, letting the enemy put these bondages back on my soul. When God said, I love you and you're free, smile. And you're going around going, ah.
No. I'm over here yelling about lawyers and Jags.
Right. See, we did in this very hour and a half. How many times did we really sin against his perfection? I can't even list them. AI, count it for us.
For real.
Right?
Yeah. No, you're right, man. And it's hard. It is so hard. Even though it shouldn't be, right? Because the way he breaks it down is, I forgave you of all those things. Why can you not forgive other people of simple things, right?
But what does Jesus cry on the cross? He says, Father, even after we're killing him, forgive them. They're dodo birds. They don't know what they're doing.
Yeah, definitely is one of the hardest things to, I remember I learned once upon a time about poison, snake poison, venom, and you have to bite on the thing and try to suck the venom out, right? Because that's what they taught you to do if you're a cowboy. I grew up in Utah, right? So cowboys were a thing, and I was getting training as a Boy Scout that if you got bit by a snake out in the woods or whatever it was, somebody sucked the venom out. I remember thinking, what the hell? Like, what are we doing? Right? They cut it out, let it vent out, let it bleed out, whatever it is.
I've seen that.
But you got to get the venom out, right? Because it will kill you. And that's where not just sin, but just, I would say, being unhappy, having things that which is why, you know what? I don't like to poke the bear personally. Like some of these things that I talk about, like even with you in this moment, in these conversations, I typically do not talk about because I know they spin me up, right? Like I don't think about my frustrations with like some of these areas of the military or whatever it was, because I know it.
Right.
When I got out of the service, like when we first met, I wasn't even watching the news. Like I went almost.
I remember that. Yeah.
I was ignoring it all.
I remember.
I was freaking struggling. It wasn't until honestly the presidential election that I got sucked back in. Yeah. Right.
Well, I remember at a couple Bible studies, somebody would say something to get you going, and you'd go off for 20 minutes. Political, this, military, government, that, right? You would go off.
The old lawyer.
Yeah.
There's
your lawyer buddy again. You and the lawyers.
That old lawyer.
Right. Yeah.
And then he invited me to go to a meeting. I went to a meeting with him one time, and I was like, I'm never coming back here.
Oh, you remember he and I even said to him, I was like, brother, I love you. We're gonna have to agree to disagree.
Yeah.
I still love you, but like we can't talk anymore.
I remember I actually contacted the pastor, and I was like, dude, this might be a problem. Like I'm not gonna keep having this kind of but the guy liked the argument. He's a lawyer. He liked the debate, so he would come back for more every time.
But he wasn't knowledgeable. Was the downside? Like everything he said was based on like Earth is flat type crap. It was like, bro,
it was all.
What website are you pulling your facts from?
Yeah, no, he was always showing his cards, bro. Yeah. And he had an agenda. He had an agenda. And the problem was, I mean, at that time, and I still, I mean, I might believe it a lot more now after some of the things that have happened in the world. But back then, I wanted nothing. We were focused on a mission of talking about what we came to talk about,
Yeah.
right? We didn't go there to talk about politics and talk about the this, that, and the other thing. But no. And I will tell you, it's hard to remember. I appreciate that being the last parable of this conversation because it's a reframe, right? It's a reframe
Yeah.
because all of what I and like I liked what you said. The Bible is a lot more of like not a self-help book, whereas for me, I look at it not just as that, but I apply everything that way in my life because it's just for whatever reason
and
the
it
way
is
God
that.
wired me, right?
And it is that too.
But God's wired me that way. I've been wired to be able to take almost anything and figure out a way to translate it into a way to help somebody do better, right? Or to help me be able to communicate a message for whatever the reasons. I don't know why God put this on me, but that's one of my gifts, right? I can take almost any cup. I've always been a half full kind of guy, right? Even when I might have a sip of water left in that joker, and boy, I'm gonna savor that sip.
I'm more of a can we throw the glass against the wall and move on kind of guy. I don't care what's in it. Throw it.
I could be that guy too, but
Yeah.
if I'm that guy, we all got problems. I'm
Yeah.
probably burning something down, right?
All right.
But you know what's funny is I will laugh while you do it because it doesn't bother.
Yeah.
Right?
It doesn't bother me either. Like to me, that's just operating
I'm already
procedure. Let's
getting
keep
up to get
going.
another glass and go fill it
There you
up.
go.
Right?
Yeah,
I've
all right.
learned there's more glasses in the cupboard. Right?
I like that. That's even better.
You know, I actually taught my kids this week in school. We did the Stephen Covey video about the big rocks.
Yeah.
Right? The big rocks in the jar.
Yeah.
And I was teaching them strategic planning long terms and about in life and how you have to recognize what are the big rocks and that you have got to get done vice getting bogged down by all of the minutia, all the crap
Right.
that's going to fill you up. And one of my students today, she's a senior and she's going through it. She was just worried about life. And I was like, hey, big rocks, sis. Like you need to stop
Right.
worrying about all that other stuff and focus on the things that really matter.
That's so you're teaching high school kids. That makes sense. But like, remember I was telling you, it drives me nuts when they come to me and they're like, Chris, did you ever know, like, if you put the sand in later, it would fill? I'm like, oh my gosh, go away. I got work to do. That kind of stuff drives me nuts. I don't want to hear it anymore.
But this is why people like me exist, right? Because the reality is most adults have never gotten the exposure to certain kinds of leadership conversations or just life conversations, right? It doesn't have to be leadership. But the reason why I use the word leadership, because if you cannot lead yourself in life, you're going to struggle.
Yeah.
Right?
That's a good
leadership
point.
Begins with your own personal discipline, your own personal inspiration, motivation, and reasons for doing whatever it is you're doing. I teach the kids, if you cannot lead yourself, you'll never lead another human being. And it doesn't, period.
So here's a topic for next time. This is something I'm really going with. And I literally went back to my bookshelf, which is huge, of all these books, the Zig Ziglars and the Tony Robbins, all of them. I got them all and I've read them all and they're highlighted from when I was like young. And now I look at them and roll my eyes. But I literally went through it and I was like, God, give me some inspiration. A couple of weeks ago, and I went like that. And it was, what got you here won't get you there. And I opened it and it's highlighted and written all over. And it looked like I was about 15, 18 years ago. And I'm like looking at some of my notes from then. I'm laughing at the kid version of me and thoughts. And I'm like, but I saw some wisdom in there that's, you always forget some little nuggets. And I looked at a few things and I went to work and on my big whiteboard in my big war room, I wrote that what got you here won't get you there. And every time I have to go to the bathroom, I have to walk by it. And it actually changed significantly how I started doing business. Cause I was like, wait, if I do what I've always done, I'll keep getting what I've always got, which is good. But if my aspiration is great, I have to change something. And I started doing some really honest reflections about some of the things that I do out of habit because I'm good at it, but it doesn't mean they're the things I should be doing now 30 years from when I started doing them. And it's really made a difference. So there's some topics if you ever want to throw that out on the table.
That's a good one. One of my favorite things I've heard lately is today's price is not yesterday's price.
That's beautiful too. That kind of goes in alignment with that, though. I like it. That's a good thing, though. That is a good one. Right. And these aren't new concepts, but they're good, and they're good to revisit.
In the rap genre, we call that a bar. right? Like,
Okay.
and I heard that on a podcast, and I was like, that's good. And then back to the whole thing about what got you there won't get you there. So when you think back on the Israelites leaving Egypt, right? The faith that got them through the Red Sea, Moses, and that faith. Remember, it wasn't much long after Moses they had to go through another river, right? And they were wanting the river to be parted, and that river wasn't being parted the way they thought it was going to be. And the idea was the faith that got you through that period of life will not be the same faith you get to use to go to that next period. Your faith has got to grow. It's got to evolve. It must develop.
So I have to add a piece to that. So here's the thing, because I've spent a lot of time reading that over and over again. And what always stands out to me is they were set free from captivity and never reached the promised land. Moses never even made it to the promised land.
No.
And I thought about it. How many of us as Christians look around that have been in church? You see the 90-year-old lady who grew up in church, been there 90 years going to church, and she's miserable and grumpy and mean. And you're like, wait a minute. You've been set free, but you've never tasted the promised land on this side of eternity. Because what was the problem with them? They were still so taught up in, hey, what were those 10 rules again? Hey, should we set up a new altar on this side of the river? Hey, should we? They were so caught up in the what rules are we supposed to follow rather than the spirit of what we are supposed to do. And so oh my gosh, did I go to church on Sunday or did I skip Sunday? Did I go to Bible study or was I sick? Did I miss too many and the pastor's mad at me? Shut up. None of that matters. Turn it over to Christ and none of that will matter. And guess what? If you're walking with Christ, you'll start showing up to these things anyway because you want to instead of going to them because you have to in hopes that you'll make Jesus happy. And now you can start tasting the promised land instead of like the Israelites who spent their entire life set free and wandering aimlessly in the desert. Anyway.
They just couldn't get out of their own way, right?
They couldn't. And we do it too. We do it too.
We do. But you know what's funny is I think the most important thing is for people to learn is just do their best to relax, do your best to have faith, do your best to love one another, right? Have your opinions. And I believe, be honest with your opinions. I don't like when people cover up their opinions and then talk bad about people behind their back. Like everything I'll say,
I'll say it. You know it too. I'll say it to your face. Like
people used to always look at me like, we can't believe you said that. And like, hey, bro,
you're saying it. You're just saying it behind closed doors.
I've got the gift of being able to say it with a smile on my face and love in my heart, baby. Like it is what it is. But the thing is, are you thinking about what I said? Because that's the concern, right? And I've also learned that not everything that people say in the world is about me, right? And so I don't get offended easily because not everything is meant for me to be offended by. And that's another challenge in this world where unfortunately everyone's hoping to be offended by something because it gives them a reason to blame somebody why they're not getting their talents freaking multiplied.
There you go. You just put a bow on it. There you go.
All right, man. Hey, I appreciate the conversation, brother.
Yes, sir. God bless. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. God bless. All right, everybody. Hopefully you like this stuff. If you like this kind of stuff, let me know. We'll do more. All right, bro. You have a good night, man.
You too, man. See ya.
And I know I was born for this. I know I was born for this. Don't care for the critics. My words are like physics, a force that they can't stop. They just don't get it. I think they forget I'm not done till I'm on top. I know I was born for this. I know